September the 30th, 1888, 1:45 a.m. Jack the Ripper has just murdered his second victim of the night in MITRE Square behind me, and he is fleeing through this very passage, MITRE Passage EC3. We know his escape route this night because after this murder he left behind his only clue, and we're now going to follow his route through the City of London to the doorway where that clue was discovered. I'm now turning right out of MITRE Passage onto Creechurch Lane, and I'm about to cross Duke's Place and Houndsditch, just as the Ripper most likely did as he fled from MITRE Square. It's amazing that Jack the Ripper escaped at all, because at the exact moment when Catherine Eddowes was being murdered in MITRE Square, these streets were swarming with police officers on his trail because of the earlier murder of Elizabeth Stride over in Berners Street. I've just crossed Houndsditch into Stoney Lane, and I'm following the most likely route the Ripper took while fleeing from MITRE Square. The city police, in hot pursuit of the killer, immediately set up a perimeter blocking every entrance and alleyway into this area. But in fairness to the police, the murderer was greatly aided by the layout of these streets. The Ripper had so many escape options. Over here, White Kennet Street. Over here, Artisan Street. Over here, Gravel Lane. And a myriad of alleyways running off of each of these places. The likelihood is, though, that he headed along Gravel Lane into the East End of London. Here we are on Middlesex Street, formerly Petticoat Lane, and the Ripper again has several choices, yet he opts to go straight across into New Goulston Street, continuing his beeline into the East End of London, going to ground in the area that he knew best. I've now arrived on Goulston Street, and over here is Wentworth Model Dwellings, dating back to 1886. This photograph shows it in the 1890s. I'm standing across from the large building that dominates the background of that photograph. We know that Jack the Ripper would have been covered in Catherine Eddowes' blood as he fled from MITRE Square. He slipped out of sight into this very doorway here on Goulston Street. Today, ironically, it is the Happy Days Fish and Chip restaurant, and few of its patrons are aware of the evil that took place on this very spot as they order their mouth-watering portions of fish and chips.
Hello. Hello.
Had he stopped in the streets and wiped his hands and wiped the blade of his knife, that could have aroused suspicion. He needed privacy, and it just so happened this was a recessed doorway where the lights were extinguished at 11 p.m. at night, giving him the perfect opportunity to duck into the alleyway and then use the apron to wipe the blood from his hands, wipe the blood from his knife, and then drop the apron, step out into the streets and disappear into the night. We know all this because at 2:55 in the morning, PC Alfred Long turned into Goulston Street and discovered the piece of apron in this very doorway where the Ripper had discarded it. But the doorway contained something else, for scrawled in chalk on the wall above the apron was a message which read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The police were so concerned about the public anger and tension towards the Jewish community that they feared the message would set the East End ablaze when news got out. They hotly debated what to do, and as dawn approached at 5:30 a.m, Sir Charles Warren of the Metropolitan Police made perhaps the most controversial decision of the Jack the Ripper investigation. He ordered that the writing should be erased before it could even be photographed. The wall is still here today, but there's nothing to remember that long ago morning when the head of the Metropolitan Police ordered the destruction of what some have seen as a very important clue to the identity of Jack the Ripper. After 4 murders, Jack the Ripper had escaped yet again, but he wasn't finished yet. For within 6 weeks, within a few short steps of this place, he would murder once more, this time the foulest and most disturbing of his killings.